Doing the intro music, Dennis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Couldn't resist. I have a hard time with silence.
And we're live.
Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Robin Pribble, and I'm the moderator of today's panel's discussion of Peacock's, and I mean this, hilarious comedy TED, which I'm very happy to say broke Peacock's record as the most watched original series and has just been renewed for a second season. Also, TED season 1 is eligible as Emmy eligible. So fingers crossed that we could get a nomination. So please allow me to introduce our esteemed panelists. I'm going to start with VES award nominated visual effects supervisor Blair Clark, who began his career as a puppeteer and machinist on Gremlins. His body of work includes RoboCop, Nightmare Before Christmas, and Starship Troopers. Blair's reputation in supervising the creation of realistic, character-driven performances has contributed to the success of the TED films and working with Seth MacFarlane in the creation of productions of these comedies. And it's an honor to be able to have you here with us today, Blair. Visual effects producer Dennis Hoffman won a VES award for outstanding visual effects in a feature motion picture for his work on Changeling. He has also served on the VES board of directors, including his role as treasurer. Dennis was also on the VES Vancouver section board of managers. And thank you for your service, Dennis. Very much appreciated. Credits include Crimson Tide, The Rock, and the Twilight series, and many, many more. Next, we have VES award and Emmy-winning Framestore visual effects supervisor Glenn Mellenhorst, who has 37 years of visual effects experience in film and television, including the iconic Emmy-winning Battle of the Bastards sequence for the Game of Thrones. I remember that. Credits include TED 1 and 2, SpongeBob, Minions, Ghostbusters, and Oscar nominee Christopher Robin, which was very good, by the way. He was instrumental in transforming Allura, which is now Framestore Melbourne's team, from 500 to 300 plus artists. Glenn recently completed supervision on Lyle Crocodile and TED the series. And next we have Framestore's head of animation supervisor, Nicholas Tripodi, who recently oversaw the animation for the TED TV series, which creator Seth MacFarlane has described as exquisite, praising the work for its subtlety, specificity, and capacity for imbuing the foul-mouthed bear with the same level of emotion as the human cast. It's hard to get that out with a straight face. Other memorable work includes characters and sequences on Men in Black, Aquaman, Peter Rabbit, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. He was also nominated for the Annie Award for his work on Game of Thrones Emmy-winning Battle of the Bastards episode. And lastly, we have Academy Award-winning visual effects supervisor Hoyt Yateman, who's a longtime member of the Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Visual Effects branch. In 1989, Hoyt won an Oscar for Best Achievement in Visual Effects for The Abyss. He also received an Oscar nomination for visual effects for his work on Mighty Joe Young. And if that wasn't enough, Hoyt won a Scientific and Technical Achievement Award from the Academy for his contributions to the invention of a new visual effects film stocks SX, that's hard to say, SFX 2002. Other credits include additional visual effects supervisor on TED Season 1, senior visual effects supervisor on Smigadoon for Universal and Apple Plus. And let's start by showing some clips, and then we'll go behind the scenes and discuss the process.
Susan, just say it once.
No.
Just one time.
She's not gonna do it.
Come on, we got a bet going.
What's the bet?
Oh, that Ted can get Mom to swear.
Just eat your supper, fellas.
You? Wait, you're not wearing pants. Where'd you get this?
Now, don't you worry about where I'm keeping stuff.
Hey, Dor, are you bringing your dolls to school?
It's the 90s. Times are changing. I'm gonna get expelled.
For what?
I'll come up with something. I'm the king of the wieners!
I'm a loser. I haven't had a girlfriend.
We've been best friends our whole lives. Your teddy bear's got you covered. Let's go talk to her.
Hi, I'm John.
Ooh, you just wash your hands?
Yeah, I had diarrhea.
Hi, I'm Ted. Nice costume!
The two of you might not be total screw-ups.
I'm gonna need your parents' phone numbers.
My parents are out of town.
I don't have parents on account of I'm a teddy bear that came alive.
Okay, sorry. I'm sure you can hear me laughing. I mean, it's hard not to. I mean, I just don't know how you got through this with a straight face. Okay, let's start with Blair. Let's talk about the onset process, your stuffies, pass setups, eyeline tools, etc., and all that you needed to do to get prep to get started.
Yeah, we used them all. The first thing we did in prep was we would break down the scripts because we had, 7 scripts that we had to figure out, and we would have basically department head table reads where we would go through everything with the department heads. A lot of them hadn't worked with anything like this before. They hadn't dealt with a CG character, so it was a little bit of getting them up to speed of like, okay, you do the stuffy pass, you do all this stuff. So once we started principal photography, we would do like on a typical shot, we would do a stuffy pass, which is, we had a little representation that was of Ted that was a stuffed bear that was the exact same size. And, either myself or Allie Mitchell, our other puppeteer coordinator, would do the performance. We would shoot the performance as the first take with the actors. And that would give everybody an idea of where Ted is going to be on any given shot. Like during the shot, he's going to be on the couch and then he jumps down, moves over to here. So they could all kind of get that in their head and be able to replicate that when we did the take. And then we'd shoot the take without the stuffy, and that would essentially be our clean pass for what we would put being Framestore or Tibbet Studio would put the digital bear in. And during that, Seth would be off camera, obviously, but he would be at Video Village doing the audio for Ted. So it was really important for him to do the audio live with the other actors so that he got all of his audio, record all of Ted's lines in the same ambient space as the actors. And so if there wasn't very much, but if there was any ad-libbing, it could be done at the same time. And then we would go through, we would do however many takes needed for that. And then we would do our lighting passes, the balls and all that.
Yes.
And that was pretty much it for shooting. There would always be things that we had to kind of come up with and choreograph on the day. There were things like when Ted's wearing a bra and John is chasing him around in the bedroom, that they needed to we had to figure it out. They would do a pass and then it's like, well, I think John's going to have to, Max is going to have to delay here a little bit to give Ted enough time to circle around, things like that, which was fun. But you know, beyond that, it was kind of shooting, and then a lot of the sweetening and the fun stuff came in post once the animators and the artists got a hold of it.
Oh, I'm sure looking at the dailies and things would be quite
Oh,
fun
yeah.
and rather ruckus. Now, Hoyt, I know that there are a lot of visual effects on the show. I wish you could speak to that for a bit and tell us a bit about your role.
Well, okay. I came in rather late. I came in the midst of post. So
Okay.
I most of the work is Blair and the gang, you know,
Uh-huh.
that did it. They had some sequences, which we'll get to later, where they had some challenges, and I came in to help kind of relieve Blair to some extent so we could focus on the critical parts, which was really Ted and Dennis the Truck, which is another character we'll get into. Because that's really where the action is. And I was kind of playing backseat and just kind of cleaning up the stuff. There were a lot of shots that were there for environmental reasons. In other words, the series goes over different times of the year: autumn, winter, summer, things like that. It also took place in Boston and in the 90s, the early 90s. So there's a lot of things that we had to do to change the environments around and make it work that way. And then there's one sequence which we'll get to where we played a major role in producing the nighttime environment that worked with the sequence they were shooting. So it's really Blair and his gang.
I know. I just wanted to double check with you as well. Dennis?
Yes, Robin.
Yes. Let's talk about your role as the visual effects producer.
Well, it was, yeah.
Tough role, I might add, on something like this.
Yeah, it was, well, I think when you have the title of the series is also a digital character, you can expect you're going to have a lot of shots. And at the end of the day, we ended up having just over about 3,000 shots. Ted composed about 2,300 of those. Framestore down in Melbourne did the yeoman's work, probably about 1935. There were some other shots that were done by Tippett, and then Fuse did Dennis the Truck. The other challenging piece too was that it was all shot in Southern California, and Seth, rightfully so, was very strong in the fact that this obviously by scripts and everything takes place in the New England area outside of Boston. So part of what had to happen besides all the season changes is that we had to make sure that all the trees that were in the exteriors around their house and had a feeling of what it was like to be in New England as opposed to Southern California.
Oh, yeah, yes.
I learned more about trees than I've ever wanted to know, to be perfectly honest. And I think that, the thing that I really felt, fortunate for, was that obviously Ted was mostly at Framestore, but also with Tippett, that both of these facilities worked really hard early on to make sure that it was interchangeable. It was very hard from a technical standpoint to tell the difference between the model. And I think that's a tribute to both of those facilities, that they actually worked really well, sharing lots of information to make sure that what they ended up building was interchangeable as we got into the shots. We ended up averaging about 350 shots per episode. It depends on where you are in the world. In North America, there are 7 episodes. In Europe, there are 8 episodes. And the difference is in North America, they combined episodes 1 and 2 into the pilot, which is
Okay, that's what I
7.
thought I was gonna say, because that was a long pilot.
Yeah, right. And I think I could be mistaken, but I think in the rest of the world, it was divvied up as 8 episodes. Glenn or Nicholas might have a better sense of how it played in Australia. It was 7 or 8. But and to me, I think, so from a standpoint of a producer, I came on board. The two major facilities had already been hired. If everyone remembers, this was the time when this was probably one of the busiest times in visual effects. And this was during COVID and, the end of it. And the great thing was that both Tippett and Framestore were on the features. And the creative teams for both of those were still at those facilities, which I think is quite, a tribute and unique. And, so, each of the features I just found out had about 1,500 visual effects shots. And so here we have episodes of 3,000. So you can just imagine what it was like. And the great part, and I think this is a great tribute to Framestore, is that, there's this digital character in Ted, but he actually, when I watch it too, and he just comes to life. And he's just another actor in this. And I think that's part of what the charm is in the whole series, is that you get beyond thinking about Ted as anything other than just this odd living creature. And I think that's a tribute to everybody that worked on it. So
I couldn't agree more. I mean, he's just a delight.
yeah.
It's so lifelike. Okay, let's go to Framestore. And you might both want to answer it, or, Glenn, do you want to start first with your work and talk about that for just a bit?
Sure.
You're ahead, and so the work would come in, and then your job starts first thing when you walk in the morning for the work from the day before.
Yeah. Well, as Dennis mentioned, we worked on the first TED and the second TED. So we had already between Nick and I, we had a fair shorthand in terms of what Blair and Seth were looking for out of the character. So we already came to the table with, like the TED Bible in our heads. And so, but I think if you had to sort of summarize what my day would be like, it'd be just like my calendar was back-to-back animation chat. Like we had a really robust pipeline this time around for our rendering and our comp, which was great. So I could spend less time with that, and most of our day was just talking shots because there were just so many of them. But from a strictly workflow point of view, as I think Blair highlighted, it was very much how we worked on the first two films. In terms of the very traditional sort of film pipeline, just a lot more to do,
I would imagine. So, Nicholas, do you want to elaborate on some of what he's saying as the animation supervisor here?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, just wanted to say how much fun it was to be on this show. I mean, as Glenn said, we have been on TED for a while since the first films, but there's just such a happy vibe on this show. Blair and Seth are just so positive and appreciative, with the work, and it was just a really good vibe all around. Everyone was kind of sad when the show finished, to be honest. Yeah. So very happy to hear season 2 is on its way. But for us, our first priority was always to channel Seth's performance as best we could. Okay. Seth is Ted, so we were always very aware, make sure that Seth's qualities came through in TED. So we had reference video of Seth doing his mocap performance. He used an Xsense, a Winder suit for that. Okay. So we developed a really robust ingest pipe for the mocap to come in, where our editorial system could actually bring that in, process it, and get it shot ready. So our animators could get on board with raw mocap on TED. Okay. So we spent a lot of time figuring out a really good process using the human IK system in Maya to make sure that data translated well to TED. So there's a lot of challenges with TED's proportions when we're transposing human mocap data to TED, particularly with things like stride length or reach length. He's got to sit at the table and eat dinner, and it's got to look completely familiar and normal, like he's done it all his life, because he has. It can't look like it's a hard thing for him to do. And the same when he's walking side by side with Johnny or Blair, he's got to look like he's just naturally keeping up. There's no extra effort involved. It's something they're all very familiar with and a very comfortable thing. And that calls back to what Dennis was saying earlier about making sure Ted didn't feel like this kind of oddity or this special thing that the audience was aware of. You know, he just needed to feel very, very much just a comfortable part of the world that he's in. And that was really important to us. So yeah, in terms of how we dealt with some of that stuff. So Seth was doing the mocap for a lot of it, but he was predominantly just standing still doing that. So whenever Ted needed to move, we would have to either keyframe that or we'd jump in our own mocap suits and generate that mocap. So we became very adept at mocapping for Ted's proportions. So if he needed to walk down a hallway, our strides would be extra long to make sure when it gets scaled down to Ted's little legs, the stride length would be appropriate and he'd be able to keep up and walk at a reasonable pace.
You know, I noticed that when they were walking together, I kept looking because I was trying to figure out, oh my goodness, how did you do that? Because the main character has such, I mean, he's tall. and,
yeah.
and I thought, how did he do it with his little legs to get there?
And when we would shoot it, we would always kind of have to remind the actors, it's kind of like walking with a toddler. You know, you can't walk at a normal pace. You have to just kind of find ways to keep it natural, but, you know, make sure that you're not outpacing them.
And sometimes
Well,
with go ahead. I was going to say sometimes you do little tricks like start Ted slightly behind, and by the end of the shot he's slightly in front, and there's you know, the other way around, slightly in front and then ends up slightly behind. It's just those little things that you need to do to cheat. Yeah, because you couldn't have him look, as Nick said, you couldn't have him look like he was constantly hurrying. So
yes, which toddlers do sometimes, I've noticed.
I think it's also important to point out too that, you know, Seth originally is an animator. So, you know, when he looked at this stuff, I think he was he looked at it from I always felt from an animator's point of view. And I think he was able then to pass that on to, you know, Glenn and Nicholas. And that's when they started to interpret as well, I think very successfully, you know, exactly what Glenn had mentioned, which was, you know, figuring out the pacing of Ted against John's walk or any of the other sequences where they were moving as opposed to sitting on the couch.
That was also one of the real benefits of it always has been with working with Seth, because he understands what we do so well. And so, you know, we can all talk as animators about performance and about what tricks you can do as animators to achieve what you need. And, you know, because quite often you can work with people who aren't that visual effects or animation savvy, and it sort of just cuts a lot of the red tape out of it. So you can actually get busy with the good stuff, you know.
But he wasn't so precious with the character that, you know, he was always very inclusive and kind of asking for you guys to bring things to it, you know, to kind of flesh it out, because over the course of both films and the series, you know, Ted's become kind of his own character. He's not just Seth in a mocap suit. He's Ted, and that, you know, a lot of that is what you guys and Tippett did.
I also like the dinner table scenes, because I noticed that, I mean, you know, you have the humans here and then they're looking down at Ted, but it was so realistic in how they treated the character and got the eye lines correct, because I would think that would be a little bit tough, especially if he's in mocap and, you know, your natural proclivity is to look at the person and not where the character should be. So did you ever substitute? Would you put it like a stuffy there just so people could, or the actors could have reference? Or
we would do a stuffy pass, and then occasionally we would have to put an eyeline tool there, which is basically a stick with two eyes. Just, you know, especially if you had a shot that was wide enough to have multiple people that had to zero in on where he was, you know, you'd stick an eyeline tool in there, which would either be covered by you know, the digital Ted or painted out.
But also,
sorry, we were kind of blew over Nick's stuff.
No. I want to go back to.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. It's all good. Oh. All right. Well, I mean,
yes, please continue.
Well, we could talk a little bit about the facial animation we're doing on Ted. So obviously Ted's got a very limited palette to work with. We can't even move his eyes. We definitely can't blink. Blair would get grumpy at us if we, or Seth would get grumpy at us actually. So
Oh yeah, grumpy, never.
no,
Never
I'm
seen
joking.
him.
So yeah, we had to figure out, a real distilled version of what the facial performance could be, and make sure it was really crystal clear what the intention was for every shot. We'd always think about, what's the one most important thing we need to communicate in a shot, and we'd make sure that that was our priority in terms of like setting his facial expression to suit that. Having Ted be too mobile in his face didn't quite look right. It became kind of a bit of an uneasy sort of look to it. So it was this kind of this simplicity that was kind of seemed simple, but it was actually, there's a lot of subtlety in there too. We had to be very careful about our choices and the slight movements to make sure he feels alive, because he could very easily just feel like a dead, empty bear.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping him alive, life in his eyes without moving those eyes is something we were really invested in making sure that worked.
Quite often I say that in complex animation, you got a lot of room to hide, right? Like if you have a really complex creature with lots of moving parts and it's just a whole bunch of color and movement, easy. You distill something down, like Nick says, to like Snoopy level where it's 2 dots and a dot for a nose, and you need to emote a whole gamut of things to, as you said earlier, Robin, to run with those other actors who have all the tricks up their sleeve and all the nuance in their facial expression. And we have eyebrows, mouth, and a small squint, and that's it. So the rest of the performance had to be carried through body language. Like you were saying about at the dinner table, adjusting the head, we can't do sidelong glances. We'd have to turn his whole head, but then we'd have to turn it in a way that it felt like it had intention and it was directed. Because if you turned a head too slowly from A to B, suddenly it turns into what Nick said, which is a turned off looking creature. You don't get the life drains from him very quickly. So every single gesture had to be building towards keeping him alive and keeping that performance.
Now, walk me through the pot smoking scene, because I was looking at that. I'm like, okay, they don't call it pot anymore. I think it's marijuana. Is the term.
We had lots of practice at the office.
Oh, you did? Volunteers. Okay, got it. So, I mean, how did you do that with you have the character and then you're having to, just walk me through it, because just for physical reference and for getting, the visual effects in there, all of that. I mean, that was a more complicated than I think people would have realized, because I honestly stopped it and I told my sons, I said, that's a complicated shot.
Yeah.
So please explain it.
From both features and the series, we've got a lot of practice, like Dennis said, of Ted and John smoking weed, either through a bong, usually through a bong. So there was always a pass off, and those were always the complicated things. So from a filming standpoint, we would usually have like Max, who played John, lighting and holding the bong. And then when it'd come time to pass it to Ted, we would have usually Allie under the bed with a glove, reaching up, and he'd pass it to her and she'd go back under. And, then we would turn it over to Framestore and they would do all of their stuff, which you guys can explain.
So firstly, we built a digital bong that completely matched, including all the kind of grime around it and the little dots of water stuck to it, the inside of it. And then what we did is we simulated liquid in the bong that would allow the bubbles to bubble through it, and also the smoke to be drawn in and out, which was all simulated. The real trick for us was rendering our bong so that when it blended to the real one, you could not see it transition at all. That also included the refraction behind, because at one point you're refracting Ted and then you're refracting John, and those things had to live in the same world. But even more critically, the actual simulation of the water while it was being handed over had to perfectly blend with the real water. So that simulation had to be hand tooled to sort of make a perfect transition. So if anybody goes online to the YouTube breakdowns that we've got there, you can see that shot. You can see that bong liquid just, and that was another one of those moments where it was shown to me in review, and I was like, done. That was just fantastic. It wasn't. It actually, the artist who did it did such a good job that the first take out of that matched really well. And so there were plenty of instances. I think we had a couple of hundred assets that we built, or more than that. I think it was 200 and something things that he touched, interacted with, picked up, shadowed, wore, little mustaches, like all those assets. I did a thing at work where I just put them all up as like a postage stamps and just sat back and looked at the amount of things we made. It was quite a lot.
Well, because, also the driving with his chauffeur uniform that he had, and that's when he had the little mustache, which was adorable. The other thing I also noticed, and we talked a little bit about, is every time he would come down the stairs and the sliding and all of that, and how that motion was done, and it was done so realistic because he looked like a teddy bear. Because teddy bears, as we know, don't have joints.
Yeah.
I think to me, I'm sorry.
I was just saying, the other thing these guys did that was really clever in the bong smoking stuff was we realized pretty early on that we couldn't have any hanging smoke. So, they'd have to exhale, but then find a way to realistically kill the smoke in the room so that you could finish the scene and it wouldn't be this, buildup of smoke in there. So from shot to shot, and also just to keep, so you didn't start eating into non-visual effect shots, and to find creative ways of making that dissipate and look realistic still.
So do we have a clip that we could share with our audience for reference?
For that moment? I can find something. Here we are. Yeah. Let me share my screen.
While you do that, one of the things I think that was amazing to me on TED is when you look at this stuff, at least when I watch the episodes on TV, it all looks like incredibly simple work. And I think that's a tribute to everybody that was working on it, because it is incredibly complex work done simply. And it's all there to basically help pass on the stories for each of those episodes and not to kind of pull attention to itself. And I think, all the facilities did phenomenal jobs in kind of managing that so that all this stuff just kind of goes by as storytelling.
I like the light on his fur, his fake fur, if you will. I think that's really nice. It just adds a good touch of reality. Looks like a stuffed animal, which is exactly what you want. And there was another character I wanted to talk about. It was Dennis the dump truck. In the was it the last 6 episodes?
It's the last episode. It's the last episode.
Okay, the 7th. Okay.
I'm sorry. It was the Christmas. It was the Christmas one. Yes.
Yeah.
Which tonally was a little different for me, because it went from really funny to more, serious. There were some, underlying themes that I felt it was handled very nicely. Especially with the dad having to come to terms with, his childhood and letting go of certain things and moving forward as an adult. And we needed to see that growth. So anybody want to jump in on this one?
Blair, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah. Fuse was our main vendor for Dennis, the truck. And for the most part, Dennis was a practical toy truck that was in all the shots with the actors, and Fuse, the main body of their work was replacing Dennis's face, basically the grill and the bumpers to form lips and be able to do all the words and the dialogue. There were a couple shots where he was digital, where he had to drive off into the sunset. And
the last shot when he was on the highway,
which Hoyt had a lot to do with. That was quite a bill. That was pretty much, I don't think there's anything real in that except for
there couldn't be. I'm thinking you would
Yeah,
have been.
just, yeah, just a bit of the roadway and a few of the cars, and everything else. The trees had to be replaced too because of the time of year they wanted to make it. So it was almost fully a 3D shot, except for a few real cars.
Yeah.
They're driving in it. Yeah. And again, Tommy Tran and his crew were fantastic. Yeah. So
yeah.
good job.
Great.
Yeah, and that was one that Seth was really kind of worried about and a little skeptical about, or was it going to be pulled off? And he was really happy at the end. They did an amazing job at it. It's really good.
It was very realistic. I was just looking at it from a different perspective as an audience member, really, and it was very impressive. Just the sheer scale.
And a lot of the other stuff that Fuse took on was Fuse and Hoyt. They did all the snow scenes in the neighborhood because that was all shot in the middle of summer. So all of those trees. The first idea was just to cover blanket, snow on the trees and stuff, and it just looked like a Rankin Bass kind of. Just it wasn't real looking, and we kind of bit the bullet and took all the leaves off the trees, which meant painting in the background of the things that the leaves were
covering.
And they did a great job with that as well.
Well, let me ask you this. Where did you, I'm just curious. I was looking at when I was watching it, I'm like, I think I know that location. So where were some of the locations in Los Angeles?
Well,
primarily the back lot at Universal.
Yeah, the Bennett house is on the back lot. It's actually Beaver and Beaver's house from Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah, don't age yourself, Blair.
Yeah.
He said Rankin Bass a few minutes ago. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's gonna, hopefully that'll get everybody like Rankin Bass. Yeah, but that little strip of street was on the back lot. And then where else? We went to Friendly's restaurant was
wasn't that in the valley?
Yeah.
Yes, it was all in the valley.
All right.
I just went blank on the name of the restaurant, but because we had to change the signs and everything.
Yeah.
And then we went to a department store.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing about all those exterior shots, like at Friendly's restaurant, anytime you saw traffic, we had to go through and comb through and make sure that they were era appropriate.
Like the 90s,
they all happened in the 90s. So every once in a while, like a Prius or a Tesla would drive by and poor Framestore would have to
paint it out
as needed.
Yeah, we built a bunch of digital casts for some of those shots.
Okay.
And
what about the school? Because there's a lot of school. Was that in some of the interiors?
No, the exterior of the school is actually on the Universal backlot as well. It's
the clock tower, isn't it?
The clock tower.
Yes.
Okay.
It's the Back to the Future square.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Or Gremlin.
Or Gremlin, yes.
All right. So the interiors were also shot on the back lot as well?
Yes, in stages.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense.
Stephen Lineweaver and his crew did a really good job with all the stats.
And the only other location was Griffith Park for the hobo sequence when they're walking off.
Okay.
Which Framestore also did a lot of work on, trying to take the Southern California look out of some of those trees.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because they wouldn't have like eucalyptus. There are certain trees that are just
They just don't live in Boston.
If you need New England trees, you go to Australia.
That's it.
And kind of translate it.
Yes. So there was also another, because I was looking at one of the behind the scenes, and I want you all to walk me through this for the bra scene, because that was really hilarious. Where he was trying to help, his friend. And I'm sure you all must have laughed yourself silly when you're doing that scene, because it's just, it's really out there, if you will.
Yeah.
So do you want to walk us through that one?
Well, like I said, that was something that on the day, it was kind of being choreographed as far as the specifics, Seth, and Max were figuring it out. And, we'd weigh in like how much time Ted needed to get around the corner. The trickiest part of that, I think, was when Blair comes in and unhooks the bra. Because there was interaction, which is always a bit of an issue. And so our key grip Stu rigged a portion of the stuffy on a stand that was on an apple box that was the right height, and Allie attached a bra to it, and then we had to have Georgia come in and unclasp it, and yeah, it was a bit of a thing. And then Framestore took it and ran with it. And
yeah, because also that stand-in didn't have arms, and obviously we had the hoops of the bra to deal with, and all that stuff had to unhook in a. So we just made Ted have a sort of a reaction to sort of like his body movement to sort of help facilitate anything, paint or anything we needed to do, and also there was padding, like wadded up tissues behind.
Kleenex, yes, tissues.
But in terms of the performance of Ted sort of choreographing his movements around, the rug's got a whole bunch of concentric rings on it, and we were using that as our marker for where he should be standing from shot to shot. And it didn't always cut to make sense, but it was fine. That was one of those sequences where, as Nick suggested, we did a lot of our own mocap. So a lot of him sort of backing away and that sort of backward sort of jogging and goading. John was clips of mocap that we stitched together and blended with live action with keyframe animation to try and make all that work.
Yeah, that was me in a mocap suit.
I was going to say, was that Nick wearing a bra?
Some of Nick's finest.
I didn't go that far in character, but yes, that was. We also storyboarded that little section too, because it was quite complex. So we did some little storyboarding just to make sure we could kind of get the flow right.
Yeah,
well, that makes sense.
So well.
But see, back to I want to touch also, Robin, on what you said earlier about that falling down the stairs shot. Just as a little piece of anim, that was a shot where, and we've talked about this in other forums, where Seth is incredible with his movie references. Like he'll talk about, like, your notes come as, in that film when such and such character does something, that's the kind of thing I want. And so we'd all have to scurry away and look the film up and see what it was. But that one was a Blues Brothers reference. Who's the character?
John Belushi, or
John
which
Belushi?
one? Dan Aykroyd.
No, Dan Aykroyd's character. Sort of, there's a point where they're in that the nun's kind of shouting at them and they're barreling at her, and they come running down the stairs, and he does this weird skip, sort of stumble down the stairs, and he's hurried to escape. And that was our brief. And Seth also said, because of the time of the show, that shot could have been dropped if it wasn't funny. It's just, if you can do something funny with Ted at that moment, please bring whatever you think might be fun and reference that film, because that's quite a funny moment. And our animator did 3 keyframe takes of that. She filmed some reference of herself, and she did 3 variations of him falling, and they're also damn funny. We just pushed them all forward to Seth, who loved it, and it ended up in the show. So it's great for us that shot, everybody talks about that shot as an iconic little moment, because for us it was one of those moments where the trust was given to us to bring something. So super proud of the team, and Claudia, who did that shot particularly, did a bang up job.
Yes, she did, because I'm telling you, that was very, very funny. I really paid attention to coming down the stairs, because I mean,
there was
Nick, I think you animated one of him running up the stairs, right, and falling.
Oh yeah, I mean, the whole thing is funny, and that's just it. It's like mining the comedy, and the little bits of these scenes is what you need to do, and that really takes some skill to know how to do.
Those are the things that Seth really reacted to. There's a couple times in the show when he kind of chuckled, and it was like you could just tell that it wasn't anything he was expecting. It was clearly something he was hoping for. But that was one of them. And the other one was at the dinner table when he's, listening and he's eating and he's got food in his mouth. That's something that just hit perfect pitch for him. And he was like, he loved it so much, we added it later on in another scene. But that was one of those moments that the guys were talking about where it was just less is more. And the subtle stuff of, like, when he's listening to Blair kind of tell him that he needs to, get an education, there's a shot where he's just kind of listening and he's slack jawed, and there's hardly any movement at all, and it's just so perfect. It's just the pose and just the minimal work on it just sells it so well.
Well, I notice when you're talking about education, that reminded me, there are a lot of classroom scenes.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
And he's in there and the students have to interact with him and he's a participant.
Yeah.
And, plus you've got to suspend the disbelief that he's a teddy bear in a classroom with human beings getting an education,
Yeah.
So that was very interesting to me. And were there any, I want to say, any difficulties in setting that up, or was it pretty easy to do?
Not really. In the classroom itself, it was pretty, we benefited definitely from he's stationary, he's at his desk. There's not a lot for him to do, and there's not a lot of interaction other than eye lines, which, we would do, a stuffy pass so all of the students knew right where he was so they could, reference when they had to look at him. But, nobody really kind of, it was usually just like they did a really good job of selling it. He's just another student, so there wasn't a lot of staring at him. They were all very accustomed to Ted being in their environment. And the other things in the school and like in the hallways and stuff like that, these guys did a lot of really great work with that's where eye lines and people knowing where Ted was.
I know, because
when you've got a lot of people kind of walking, that was times when we had to kind of keep a really close eye on them and make sure like this guy in the red shirt keeps walking through Ted, so we have to communicate that with the AD, if like, okay, this guy, make sure you give him enough space, walk around him. And but these guys did a great job with that stuff.
So we have a couple of questions that I want to pose to you. Anonymous attendee wants to know, did you use puppets as a substitute for interactions? And clearly,
just the stuffy pass. Just the stuffy pass. When we would do that before each take, we would do a stuffy pass usually that consisted of either what he's doing, looking around, or getting out of a chair and going somewhere so that they kind of had an idea of, okay, he's going to leave that way and exit out the door. But
there was a couple of instances where you guys did like the little pause, like when he's kind of
we had some hands for hand. Yeah.
Like when Blair and he are kind of slap fighting at the desk,
So we had that, and occasionally we would keep elements of the stuffy. If somebody was like, there's moments where Blair's holding Ted up against a drain pipe in the dark, and her hands are buried into the stuffy. So we used that stuffy's fur line around her fingers and tried to blend it into our fur so that interaction felt very tactile. Those sorts of things were important. So if we could use the stuffy or those little hand things that Blair and Ali puppeteered, then definitely we'd leverage those.
Yeah, we had a stuffy that we had like a stunt stuffy to where the head and the arms and legs could all come off. So you could just like in that particular case, Georgia would like just have the torso and she would like, do the torso, and then we'd put little marks on the wall for her eye line, and then Seth would adjust it. And look at there's a lot of times when he'd say to the actors, just look at his nose, because that felt more right than if they were looking at his eyes. So.
Okay. That makes sense. So we have another question from I don't know if it's Vikas or Vikas. I want to say Vikas Gandhi, talking about the set. Was there any use of miniatures? Which I think is a very good question. But it doesn't sound like there was.
No,
I mean,
no, not that I'm aware of. No.
There aren't any. No.
Well, all right.
A lot of digital props built though.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. I would like to talk about episode 7, the Bethany Johnny car scene. He's driving, and you've got the blue screen right in the background where the characters are sitting on top and on their way. Was it to the prom, or no, it was their first date.
It's the first date.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So this is something where I kind of came in to help. This is a sequence that had already been shot. It's the two main characters sitting on top of a little sedan that Ted is driving in his chauffeur costume. And they're doing Aladdin, so they have, it's Halloween, so they have a carpet on the roof, and they're dressed as the princess and Aladdin on it. And they're driving down a night street in Boston in the 90s. And they had shot the blue screen where they had multiple cameras running. You have 360 degrees of view, essentially. It's a lot of driving shots. You're inside of a car, and you've got usually windows or portholes to help minimize the look of the background. But in this case, it's in front of everyone. And they had these light effects that they did on the blue screen stage, where every 30 seconds or so, they would pass a 4x4 flag revealing like a street light, like a kind of a yellowish sodium vapor kind of street light that would pass over. And I can start it and I can talk over it as we do it, so we can stay at 50 minutes of time. So let me share, if I may, and I'll start this. Gradient Effects did the work, and they did an amazing job down there. But when I came on, they had shot at least 3 attempts using plate photography. They did once, I think, in Boston, and they did it several times in California. And the problem with any kind of array that you have is that the perspective is defined by that camera array. Here, they're moving the camera around, and they also have this kind of light effect that's being passed upon them. And so what we ended up doing is building a full 3D environment. And this allowed us to get the correct perspective, vanishing points, track the camera properly. And then we actually broke that camera free so that it had a feeling of being separate, like you had a camera card that was kind of tracking the actors. It was subtle, but it actually helps. We rendered everything in Arnold. It was rendered volumetrically, so we had atmosphere and things like that with all the HDR equipment to make it look like it had the right thing. It was the exact street that they drove in Boston. Believe it or not, we used Google Maps to get an exact replica of it. And again, all the vehicles that are seen in there and all the lighting and things like that is done with the proper, cars and vehicles and things. So we were able to match specific all the lighting effects that were happening on stage. And I think even if you did LED volumes, you'd still be kind of caught in the same dilemma where you can't really use plates because of the fact that you have all these different cameras running. And I think you'd end up pretty much doing it the same way. Real time, I think, might be difficult, even Unreal, because of the amount of defocus and also the volumetrics that we were rendering in it. It'd be very difficult, I think, to do at speed, at 24 frames per second. So that's kind of it. So it was really solving the problem of something that had been shot, and they had tried. I know that Framestore did, I think they shot like hours of footage, but Framestore did do one shot that actually looked really good, and that was the one that we used as kind of the reference. And Seth was very concerned about it being CG, and a tip of the hat goes to Gradient and the guys, Olshan and group, because when we ran it, it was kind of a live or die situation for me. I said, no, we can do it. We'll do a test. And we did. And so when I ran it, he thought it was the wonderful shot that Framestore did, but it actually was CG. So we got the blessing, and we went ahead and did the sequence. So it's standard VFX kind of 101, but really well done by the gang, and it was fun to execute and do. So that's kind of it. So I'll stop sharing here because you get the idea. But that's the story of that sequence.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So I have another question. Did you do anything else from one of our attendees? Did you do anything else aside from using the HDR eyes for Ted's eye reflections?
Yep, we did. Firstly, we'd start with the HDR eyes. Then we would use that obviously for principal lighting for Ted, but we would quite often paint out some of the practical lighting because sometimes it gave you a bit of a Starfield vibe in his eyes. You didn't want too many reflections. It actually interrupted with his read. And then quite often we would hand place our own reflection cards to get the single or promote a certain light up in terms of its luminance and bring others down, so that we had a more simple reflection. So you had an element of the environment reflected, but then a ping, which is kind of a cartoony conceit, but sometimes we needed to art direct that a bit. So we did a fair bit of that work.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I mean, the eyes are very important in the character, and it sells him, if you will.
Yeah, especially since he can't move his eyes.
Yeah. Exactly. So you want the believability. And I'm just trying to think, is there anything else that we could share about the making of with our audience that
I
you
just
may
wanted
not
to,
have felt we touched on?
yeah, I just wanted to point out one thing that was very useful. Uh, During principal photography, we use something called view screen, which Brandon Fayette came up with, and he and his team kind of developed it for the Orville as a way of like doing some previs. It was a previs tool so that on the Orville, so they could see like where they on a scout, they could see where a spaceship was going to land, and they could put some pre-animated elements in there. And on TED, we used it basically for the camera operators. They could get a representation of TED kind of piped into their feed, so they could turn it on and off, so they could see, oh, that's where TED's going to be, and they could kind of interactively compose the shot to that. And that was really helpful for them. And then, during pretty much all of principal photography, the view screen team stayed and kind of worked in the corner, kind of, um, kind of modifying this tool and getting it ready for when it is ready to go, using all of principal photography as a test bed, or these are the kind of situations that this is going to be used for. So it was really helpful for the operators. And then they also supplied some TED, for filling in holes at the end and post before, Framestore and Tippett's work was done for like studio screenings and things like that. They supplied that. But, since then they've been working on this nonstop, and it's like really amazing and night and day. So I'm sure we'll see it on season two. Yeah. And if anybody has questions about it, the technical end of it, you should go to viewscreen.com, and you can get a beta seat for that there.
Okay, well, thank you. And we've only just got a few minutes left. I would like to say thank you for taking the time to share this. I mean, honestly, this has been a really fun adventure. And I can tell that you all had a blast working together. And, it's one of those things that when I was watching, I'm like, how lucky are we that we get to do this for a living?
You did right.
It's like it's like laughing while you're working,
Yeah.
and solving problems and having a good time at the same, and he's Seth is really truly an interesting and talented, and interesting in a good way, and talented performer, director, writer, everything. I mean, I used to take one of my children and point to Seth on the screen when he was playing the piano. I said, see, you could grow up. You could, if you learn the piano, you could do a lot of things. And the only time we would play the piano was to make the dog howl. So we stopped that.
Yeah.
But is there anything in closing that you would like to share with the audience?
Well, I just want to give a shout out to the production team because, as we said, it was 3,000 shots.
Yes.
And for, as Blair has mentioned, Allie, who started really on set, but then grew into being a production coordinator and really handled a lot of the information exchange between Blair and Seth and the facilities. And then we had Christopher Finley, who was our production manager for the first half. He was from Atlanta, and as we extended, he had to get back to Atlanta. So Gene Kozitsky came on to assist me, and then Chris Tucker was there, and Ben Baca. And this was, and we had at our peak, we had 3 VFX editors. And they all just did a phenomenal job, and I just didn't want to leave this podcast without shouting out to them that they were just phenomenal.
And Webster Colcord,
and Webster, yes,
our mocap guru, who was very instrumental in all that. And I just wanted to add, just a huge thank you to, our VFX companies. We had Framestore, Tippett Studio, Gradient, Fuse, who else, Dennis? But
Males.
yeah, Mel,
But-
everybody did such a great job.
It
And
takes
the work
a village.
shows. It really, the work really shines.
It
Yeah,
does.
and Robin, you were completely correct. It was a great show to work on. It was one of the fun ones. You know, not always it's always not always fun. You know, but this show is, and it was just such a comforting thing to come back and work with like Blair and everybody else, and just the same team. And we worked hard, but we had a great time doing it, which is rare.
Oh, well, I'm glad. I can't
Yeah.
wait for season 2 to get started. And I hope that it is nominated for an Emmy. And I want Ted to be up there as a presenter and maybe a recipient. I think we all do. So thank you all for your time. And this was really a fun panel discussion.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank
Quite
you.
special.
Thanks.
You all. All right. We'll see you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.